Hello and welcome to the YPO Deal Network Turnaround Masterclass. I'm Deborah Fine. I'm on the executive committee of the Deal Network, and it's my pleasure to moderate the call today. We have 4 panelists that span geographies and sectors, and they'll give you a candid look at the companies that they've turned around, taken from the brink of bankruptcy to success, and sometimes maybe not so much so because we learn from our mistakes as well. We're going to have them present and interact for about 40 minutes, and then for about 15 minutes at the end, we'll have Q&A. And we're also going to put up a playbook which can tell you what to do if you're an investor, kind of guide you, investor, CEO, and we'll send that out to all the registrants, and hopefully we'll have that on the Deal Network. And before we begin, we just wanted to ask you a couple of questions quickly, I believe, to find out what you're most interested in, geography, sector, so we can hopefully cover that. And so can we share a survey, or should I just, if you could type in your chat box.
Well, into the Q, we'll utilize the Q&A. So yes,
okay.
Yep. You know, if you put your cursor over the screen, or if you're on your phone, at the bottom of the screen is a Q&A box, and you can just type in the information there, and our panelists will be able to see that.
Terrific. Thank you, Jeff. So we're going to cover some different areas. If you want to put up the slides. So today's agenda, introductions, the 12 areas we're going to cover, and why don't we go to some of the areas. And you'll see with this great slide, sometimes everything seems like an avalanche, where it's all coming at you at once. So this is a very appropriate slide that Brian Pohl put up. And the next slide, thank you. So we have Doug Mellinger with us, and Doug is from the US, and he's a partner at Clarion Capital. They're a middle market private equity firm, and he also successfully ran and exited several technology companies, so on both sides. We have Brian Pohl. Brian is the learning chair for the Deal Network and has run venture capital firms and gone in and done several successful turnarounds in media, sporting goods, and in consumer products. We have Houman Azhari in the US. He runs Beyond Capital, which is a private equity firm that does good as they do well, which is what we all want to do. And he has been an entrepreneur and investor for over 20 years. And Alex Witt is with us from Spain, and he's managing director of a private equity fund, PHI, which acquires divestitures of large multinational companies and then turns them into successful standalones. So the topics that we have, cash and liquidity is the first one. And Houman, if you could please take that topic.
Thanks, Deborah. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This is Houman, and it's a pleasure to be speaking to you. I think the picture that we had on the slideshow, which showed the avalanche, shows the enormity and the speed with which businesses get hit in situations where an exogenous shock like this hits our system. We will go through the 12 points, as Deborah said, and we chose to start here with cash and liquidity, and obviously it's the lifeblood to any business to continue to have a liquidity timeline and runway, especially when revenues and the investments and the various other sources of capital that come in are being cut off. When we talked about cash and liquidity amongst ourselves, we thought that we could put them out with the following headings. Obviously, there's suppliers to negotiate with. If it's possible to delay payments, although those suppliers will probably have the same problems as all our businesses, and may be difficult to do so. But if it is possible, that's a discussion worth having. Landlords are going to be in a position where they're going to need to do everything they can to make sure that their tenants stay alive. Otherwise, they'll have an empty property in a recession. Liquidity, lenders. Again, banks, I assume, will have two ways of looking at the situation. Some will harden up, and some will want to enforce everything that they have in their covenants. But I assume most will soften up, because again, the banks don't want to be the holders of equity. So speak to your banks, figure out if there's any kind of available liquidity to just draw down, figure out if there's any further liquidity to be made, figure out what kind of covenants and what kind of expectations the bank has, and negotiate the maximum time and maximum cushion. Customers and our colleagues will talk about the customer side of all this, but again, ensure that the receivables are coming in, ensure that the health of the customers is being looked at. Things that you can control in terms of capital expenditure, anything that's not necessary in the short term is probably best delayed. Anything that isn't going to give an immediate return is probably best delayed. There's the costs, other costs that we control, the discretionaries. I don't think anyone's doing any travel and entertainment at the moment, so that's under control by the powers that be for us. But again, figure out where to spend money. And obviously, one of the other huge costs and sources of liquidity, which is a separate subject on itself, is the employee cost. In most businesses, that's the most important cost that you have, but also the most important asset that one has is their employees. I've seen people go from furloughs in the aviation world, where I come from, to 20%, 30% cuts in terms of headcount, or just 20%, 30% cuts in terms of salary and hours. There's many ways of doing this, many ways to engage employees, make them feel like they're treated fairly, and also, frankly, have them ready to come back immediately when the business picks up. So those were some of the headings that we thought we'd address when talking about cash and liquidity. And I think I'll also hand over to Alex, who had a few points on this as well.
Thanks. Well, I think to your points, I think you mentioned most of the things. What we've done in the companies when we've had to make severe cuts and make sure that we survive as long as possible. And I think in this, what's going on right now with COVID-19 is we've been extremely tough in all the areas you've mentioned, rent, CapEx, spending, team, marketing, all the things you've mentioned. We've been very tough there. When it's worked best for us, it's when, apart from us as shareholders really pushing it and being very close to the team and supporting them on this, is to really build teams within companies that are really in charge of this. When you kind of tell everybody save money and everybody tries to save, we found it to be less effective than if you have a couple of champions, as you call it, who really are kind of leading this across the board in all areas, right? So we have these kind of task force guys who are renegotiating rents as with suppliers of people, and it can be people from within the company or will provide support. But that's really worked well because it makes it easier for them as well when they have clearly the hat on of that's what you have to do now, as opposed to everybody having to do it when they have their day job as well. So I guess as Nat and I would just do, I would just add that that's really helped us.
So then we're going on to team, and Alex, could you speak to the team and what type of team you need to have in this case?
Sure. During the last weeks, what we've been doing, I mean, you can talk about general turnaround situations, but I think this has been so unique in that there's been such a dramatic change in the lifestyle of people because they can't move, they're working from home, there's an epidemic, so we've had to make a lot of changes. So I'll talk about two parts. First of all, people in an office, how we've managed that, and then people in factories, how we've managed that. So I think in offices, obviously working from home, providing people with technology and with as much flexibility, with as much empathy. Some people are in a small apartment with a lot of kids, and so they can't always get on the phone. So I think having empathy and understanding that it's very hard for everybody is very important. And we've really been trying to push, be as understanding as we can be, because there's no other choice, right? So I think That's been very important. And I think we've tried to, in order to keep people motivated as well in this situation, we've tried to kind of define that this is the new normal, at least for the next couple of months. So we've tried to formalize some of the informal things that normally go on in an office. You know, normally you meet people on the coffee machine, you go down to have a coffee on the street or whatever. At least here in Spain, that tends to happen a lot. And we've tried to formalize it. So I have meetings every day at 9:30 with my M&A team. I have a 10 o'clock call with my finance team. And sometimes it's not even, we don't have anything particular to talk about, but it's just to kind of catch up. Sometimes we talk about the kids, sometimes we talk about work. It's usually a mix. So I've tried to kind of formalize these things that we're used to doing in the office to make this a new normal. It takes away some of the anxiety. It creates a little bit of structure. And, you know, we're a small team. So if we wouldn't have done that formally, it wouldn't have happened, right? We don't tend to have a lot of meetings otherwise unless they're necessary. So I think reenacting these kind of hallway chats in a more formal way on Zoom like this, where we can see each other, has really helped. I do a Friday afternoon where I get the whole office together and we just talk about, you know, what's going on, and you know, some things at work come up, but I'm trying to normalize that. So that's a bit easier to manage. That's kind of managing human relations. In the factories, it's been much more important. We have factories in Italy and in Spain, as you know, two of the hardest hit countries in the world. So we've been dealing with this for over a month now. And there, what we've done is really try to create a safe environment, both from reducing chances of pandemic growing, so people getting sick, but second, and as important, is for people to feel safe going to work. So we've really reinvented the processes. We've made small batch teams of 6, 7 people to work in particular areas of the factory, so that if somebody gets infected, that team goes home in quarantine and somebody else takes over, as opposed to 20 people being infected. We try to reduce the contagion perimeter, make that as small as possible. We've created more time between shifts so that people don't meet and change of shifts. We've closed the cafeterias and provided free food that get delivered in a way that is safe. So basically creating environments where people feel they can go to work and keep productivity going.
Okay, Brian,
Deborah,
you,
Deborah,
sure, go ahead, Doug.
yeah, I just want to add a couple of things. You know, one thing I think it's really important for everybody, I had my forum meeting last night, for example, and you know, a couple of our members are literally in the process of laying off half or more of their workforce this week. And, you know, I've been through this numerous times. And, you know, one of the things I've ultimately learned is fire fast and hire slow. You know, in the end, we talked about liquidity a little bit. You know, we got to make sure that our companies are actually around to not only get back into business, but ultimately thrive. And I think people have to view this as something that's probably going to go on longer. You know, while stock markets are going to go up, stock markets are going to go down, you know, people are going to have excitement about the fact that certain curves are starting to flatten. But the fact is that it's going to take a while for this to come back. This is, in our lifetimes, really one of the true first pandemics that has hit absolutely everybody. You know, even in the 08-09 crisis, there were certain parts of the world, in China and others, that didn't really live through what we lived through, for example, in the United States. And so this time, the supply chain around the world is broken. It's shut down. It's got to get restarted in many cases. You know, there's things that people are going to need to do, and I would just go deep into the organization. I'd be as creative as possible for some of our companies. You know, for the essential workers, the people that are still going into the offices, we literally have reconfigured the office building to split people from within functions so that you've got different people on different floors or different part of a floor to try to keep people away who are in the same departments. So a lot of work has gone on over the last 3 to 4 weeks to try to enable us to operate either remotely or to stay within the organization. And the last thing I just want to add is, if there's ever a time that YPO is going to be valuable in your life, it's right now. And you know, the key thing I say to people is don't go it alone. Lots of people are dealing with this. You know, they're making mistakes. They're doing it right. They're learning. Some people have dealt with this a month ahead of us in the United States. So I was on the phone with somebody in Asia last night, just sharing what they went through 2 months ago versus what we're going through now. So there's lots of both YPO members to help. And it's not just your forum. I would reach out broadly throughout the networks. But the other thing that I think is really important is to don't just look at it as your forum. There is key C-suite people in your organization that are also trying to figure this out. And I would quickly try to get a hold of other YPO members and get your CFOs talking to each other, get your chief human resource officers talking together. Make sure that they have networks. It's a small investment to get a hold of others, to start creating 3 or 4 people that can be meeting on a weekly basis to talk about what they're doing and bounce ideas off. But I think it'll pay huge dividends if we actually utilize the global YPO network.
Thank you, Doug. Brian, can you speak to teams and how to make sure the company has its best chance for success in a turnaround?
Yeah, so I think the point fire fast, hire slow is very accurate. Invest everything in the A team performers. Spend no time on the B team. They're regular, good, hardworking employees, and call your C, D, and F team as quickly as possible. But put all your energy into the A team. And I can't emphasize enough, tap fellow YPO'ers, your forum mates. I know that in the deepest, darkest days of turnarounds, and twice we had creditors seizing assets while we were trying to run the company, and we succeeded in keeping the company alive. Having somebody at the end of the day, you could just go, I didn't believe that would happen today. Made all the difference. So definitely have a team for you and inside your company.
Okay, terrific. Okay, hold on. Alex, would you like to add anything to that, or Human?
I spoke already. I don't know, Human, you want to say something?
Okay, all right. So let's move on to investors. So we do seem to have a lot of people who are on the line and worried about creditors, equity, debt, et cetera. So Alex, could you speak to investors?
Sure. So investors, I think they're the important thing. We have limited partners who've invested in our funds. And I think the big message is early communication, break the news early, tell them the truth, and tell them what you're doing about it. My example is not from COVID this time, but we had a factory that we bought, and 2 months after we bought it back in 2010 burned. And this was before I had a fund. This was kind of deal by deal investors, and some of them hadn't put the money yet. And so I was wondering what was going to happen. And I called them up and immediately started on a daily briefing, almost telling them what was going on. And I learned a lot through the process, just because it taught me that, they're not expecting everything to be okay if a company burns down. They're expecting you to be in control and to not be freaking out. So I think having investors who can see that there's somebody at the wheel and is thinking through the problems and is looking for advice, I think is what an investor is looking for. So since then, I've been sending weekly emails to my investors now with COVID, what we're doing, what the situation of the companies are. And a lot of them have been very thankful, giving me advice, calling me, telling me, hey, speak to this guy, speak to that. What about this? And they're just happy that it seems controlled. And then they're going to go worry about other investments they're in, where maybe there isn't so much control. So that's it's a fairly brief recommendation, but I think it's extremely important. I mean, don't be afraid to give them the bad news. Tell them early, and they're going to be very supportive.
Okay, and obviously during this time, sales and customers are equally as important. Brian, can you touch on how to work with your salespeople and your customers?
Yeah, so the number one thing we did is make sure that the CRM system is up and running properly, and spend time combing through that and really making it a key performance driver for salespeople. We put the criteria in place that within 10 minutes of coming out of a meeting, the salesman had to have key bullet points uploaded into the CRM. They could do it on their mobile phone. The point being, they'll forget about it by the time they drive to the next meeting, et cetera. So really good information. We did an analysis of customers, and we would look at the top 80% over the last 3 or 4 years, who was profitable in terms of margin contribution, and who were the big customers. And then we had a very clear plan: either move customers who had dropped out of the top 10 back into the top 10, customers who were below target margin, readjust pricing for them to move them into target margin. And the third thing is we fired customers that were not profitable. And we did that in two ways. Either we discontinued the product that they were buying, or some customers were really demanding in terms of time, salesperson time, management time. And so we said, we'll only sell to them if it included a installation contract or a service contract. And we were open and honest and said, we get 30 calls from you for one installation. And normally we expect 1 to 2 calls, and we have to bill for that time. And some customers said, great. Other customers said, well, if you're not giving me free time anymore, I'll go elsewhere. And that's okay. We stopped losing money.
And then I think, thank you. And Human, I think you have a good example of trying to be too nice to a client, perhaps, or a customer.
Look, everyone is on a knife edge, right? There's the human side, there's the relationship investment side of making sure that you do everything you possibly can to invest in your suppliers, your customers, your stakeholders. And then there's the reality of people running out of cash. So when I was in aircraft leasing, there was one airline that was losing money fast. 7 or 8 lenders and lessors to that airline, they all started to leave one by one and pull their aircraft out. And we decided that this airline's going to make it, and we're going to be the ones that stand by them. And we invested more and more and more in taking less and less money from them whilst they used our assets and actually abused our assets without our knowledge. And in the end, they went bust. So we could have cut our losses at a 20 million outstanding, and we actually ended up taking a $130 million hit. So it's very difficult to balance the desire to be helpful, desire to stand by an industry leader that you think is going to make it, and then actually tripling or quadrupling your losses.
Right.
Wow. Just one quick answer, just while we're on customers, to Jean-Pierre, you asked about credit risk. One of the things we did is, for all of the big accounts, we had a person in our accounts department call their accounts payable department 7 days ahead of a payment coming in to reconfirm it. And as soon as they spoke to them, they sent a confirmation email. So if a customer was late, the day and before noon, the day the payment is late, we had to have that customer on the phone, and we were able to refer to an email from 7 days prior where they promised payment. And it helps keep customers on track. And you very quickly find out customers that start making new excuses are the ones that have the real credit risk.
Right. We're going to go to supply chain and production. So Brian, could you stay on that and talk about safe working and factory issues?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things. In the COVID environment, safe working, there will be a whole set of new health and safety initiatives, making sure that people feel safe coming to work, and that anybody at work is safe. And if something happens, I think it was mentioned earlier, having an A team and a B team is great, where those two teams do not overlap. Also have a C team. So if the A or B team gets contaminated by a virus or anything else, you can bring in a fresh C team ready to go as quickly as possible. I think the other is talk to your suppliers the same way you talk to customers. We were desperate to increase our working capital inside the business. And one of our biggest suppliers, we went to them and said, here's our turnaround plan. Here's the progress we've made so far. Here's where we failed so far. And that's important to show a balanced approach, where you've been successful and where you're behind plan. We were hoping to get them to extend credit to us from a 30-day cycle to a 60-day cycle. I'll never forget that meeting, because after 30 minutes of Q&A, the CFO of our supplier said, all right, you're here to ask me to extend your credit terms. We said, yes, sir, we are. He said, I'll give you 90 days and I'll double your credit limit. It was far and beyond what we had hoped to achieve out of that meeting. So being open, honest, and sharing the information in the supply chain made all the difference. And Keith, just around your question about communication of the company and maintaining trust, communicate as often as you can, as authentically as you can. And if the message changes frequently, share why it's changed. But importantly, around layoffs and furloughs, I come back to the fire fast, hire slow, do it once, do it deep. make that decision once. Don't say we're going to cut 10% of the staff and then add another 10% and another 15%. Tell people up front, we're going to cut 30% of the staff and we're going to start with 10% today. I remember being in a company where it went through a big staff reduction, and I'll never forget the CEO standing up and he said two things. One, every one of you is going to have a one-on-one discussion with a member of management, and you'll have that for 10 or 15 minutes. And number two, before every one of you goes home today, you will know if you have a job or not. Number three, for those of you who don't have jobs, we want you back in here at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, and we're going to start the process with you of updating CVs, what job resources are available, et cetera. And what it did is it gave people who were let go something to focus on immediately about taking next steps. And I was fortunate, I remember commenting to him about that over a beer, and he said something else I've never forgotten. Never fire somebody on a Friday because they sit at home and fret all weekend. Fire them Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday when they have maximum access to government departments, to lawyers if they're going to come after you, to headhunters. Never on a Friday.
Thank you. And I know everybody's trying to tighten their belts. There's also, staying relevant and looking for opportunities during all of this, because there are some. So Doug, could you touch on that and quickly on leapfrogging effect, please?
Yeah, I'm gonna talk about both of those. We're living in pretty crazy times, and pretty unprecedented times. And if you look back on these periods of time in history, whether it's the Great Depression or the Great Recession or other times, out of that has come new businesses, new business models. People have come out stronger, but unfortunately, a lot of people have also perished during these periods. So it's how are you going to deal with this? And there's a couple different areas that we all need to be thinking about. We have, for example, one of our portfolio companies that very likely is just not going to make it. We sell through the department stores mostly. We do have an online business, but it actually sells glasses and silverware. Not only is Macy's and Bloomingdale's and Bed Bath & Beyond closed right now, so we have no way to sell there, but nobody's getting married. Nobody's having dinner parties. So whether or not we're going to be able to survive this, we're doing everything possible. But we're really trying to rethink, how do we go online? What is the product mix that we could sell? And so, the first thing that I think people need to do is to take a step back and completely rethink what their business practices are. What does working from home mean? What are the online opportunities? What sort of products are selling? A good buddy of mine, was selling, his business was selling cleaning products for boilers and things of that nature. And, he had an okay business, but all of a sudden he completely has shifted over the last 4 weeks, and his opportunity set has increased 40-fold because they had a tiny little division that had a way to aerosol the liquor, which enables you to clean surfaces very easily. And they've taken in orders. Now they're trying to figure out how to fill these orders. But literally, his company could become a 40x increase over what it was before, just because they've gone back, they've relooked at their business, they've looked at what products they had and what could sell or what could be repositioned in this market. As we looked at a bunch of our companies and the business practices, we had a company that's in the anti-money laundering business that works for banks and payments companies. We were not allowed by contract to work outside of our four walls. Well, we've used this opportunity to renegotiate all of our contracts with our clients. And now we're starting to have the conversation of what does this look like when this disaster is over? How could we be a different business? Because now we could tap into different human capital and do our job in a completely different way. I'm chair of a for-profit college that's now had to completely go online. And we're trying to now rethink, what does that mean for us after this is over? Because there's businesses that we could do that we never contemplated before. But the last thing, and I think the most important from a leapfrogging, is going to be the potential for acquisitions. There is unfortunately going to be a lot of your competitors that are not going to make it or in severe problems right now. And if you look back in 08, 09, many companies were bought just for working capital, you know, just to take over the businesses. So having your list put together right now around what companies did you compete with, whether it's new products you're looking for or new geographies that you're looking for, not only have the list, but start reaching out to them to see how they're doing, because you will find opportunity to be able to do that. And that goes to the investor. You know, if you're not communicating with your investors and letting them know what you're thinking about, letting them know what you're going through, it's going to be very difficult to line up the capital potentially to take advantage of these opportunities. But, you know, I think if you do so, you will find things that you never imagined to be able to leapfrog your business from where it is today to the future. The key, though, is just staying alive long enough to be able to take advantage of that.
Thank you, Doug. Hooman, can you speak to leadership tips, so things that the CEOs on the call can incorporate to work on with their teams?
Sure. Thanks, Deborah. You know, I think the very basics of leadership apply even more today in a time of crisis. A leader has to have vision, and I think everyone's world, as Doug just mentioned, is changing, right? And there's opportunities and there's tremendous threats. The vision of how to deal with that, and then the inspiration of bringing your people and your various stakeholders along with you counts as much as it ever did, if not more so. Creating, especially in this world where we're now being disconnected physically, but actually it seems like we're connecting successfully virtually, keeping people engaged, keeping people as part of that mission, as part of that culture, as part of that purpose, as part of that group that shares risk and shares that desire to go beyond this, is going to be even more important. I think there's fear in this environment, and allaying that fear and making sure that one leads with a culture that allows people to make mistakes, and allows people to be vulnerable, to be truthful, to ensure that those mistakes aren't again. Leadership includes learning, being adaptable. Again, no more so than Doug and every one of our colleagues that I just mentioned. Leadership requires being decisive. And I think the bunch of decisions that come at us, like the avalanche in the picture, are going to continue. And that decisiveness and being able to have the information and the analysis in your new processes and in your new dashboard in order to be decisive based on the right information is hugely important. I think that the communication piece that Brian, Alex, and Doug have mentioned so eloquently is huge, right? And a leader needs to build that trust with the customers so they know you're still going to be there, so that they give you the information so you know how to, you know, pivot your business model so that you can provide them what they need and leapfrog, as Doug elegantly put it. Talking to your suppliers to make sure that your chain isn't disrupted, to get that trust so that they give you credit. And so, you know, when I was at Gate Gourmet, which is a big airline catering business, one day after 9/11, our suppliers just sort of showed up and said, it's now cash on delivery. And we didn't have cash to take delivery. And suddenly you can't function anymore, right? I think if we had spoken to them earlier and made them understand, as Alex said, that we're on it and we're dealing with everything, we would have been much better. So that communication side, the connection with the various stakeholders, and the new rhythm and cadence that the leaders put in place to govern a business are hugely important.
So it seems that everybody is talking about making sure that you're up in front of things before they happen, be very communicative, be very honest, empathetic. All of those are excellent. We have a lot of questions around help. So government and support, insurance. So Alex, could you speak to some government support options out there? You might be on mute.
Yeah,
Alex.
sorry.
There we go. Okay.
I can't speak specifically on US help or things like that, obviously, but I can talk a little bit about how we've managed it in the different countries. We're present in various countries, and every country in Europe is having different solutions. So what we've actually done is we started fairly soon I spoke to some YPO members who I thought would be well connected with certain banks or with government people who were close to the decisions that were being made, because this was literally on the fly from one day to the other, very improvised. I also spoke with some investment bank, corporate finance guys, people who are used to dealing with the high levels of banks, because in Spain's case, the government help is being channeled through the banks. They're giving guarantees to the bank for 70–80% of the loan will be guaranteed by the government, but the government is the one who's giving the loan. And therefore, because that was the case, we had to on one side figure out what were the loans looking like with the government, and how do we speak with the bank. So we did that fairly early on with the idea of getting in line as quick as possible. So there's a couple of our companies where we need help. Revenues are down to zero almost in retail and so forth. And so we really need to try to extend the life as much as we can. So apart from all the cost cutting that we've talked about before, we were able to get in line earlier. We figured out in Spain, for example, that at the end it was a one-to-one discussion with the banks. We've now raised quite a bit of money already from banks. We still need some more, but I think that getting in very early, speaking with people who knew what was going on, who read all the research in more depth than we did, and knew kind of what the possible help was going to be, helped us kind of at least be in the first quartile of people looking for help.
Okay, and Brian, can you speak to, say, insurance and other things that these turnaround CEOs could have access to?
Deborah,
Yeah,
before we
sure.
do, let me just add one more quick thing on the
Doug.
financing. I'm finding that you have the federal programs, and PPP in the United States is one
Right.
that's getting a lot. But what we're also finding in some of our companies is that both states, even some communities, and also various agencies like Department of Education, our college is finding that there's very specific programs that don't make the national news, but it's worth having your CFO do a lot of research to look everywhere under every rock, because you'll be amazed at how much money is being thrown at this problem right now.
Right, and Brian, could you add to that, please?
Yeah, so despite my accent, I've been based here in the UK for the last 20 years. And, when it comes to help, and I see one of the questions is, would it be better to take the help in, make regular payments for 8 weeks and then make the cut? It really, really comes down to cash preservation, cash preservation, cash preservation. So in the first instance, any relief you can get, take it in, hold on to it as tightly as you can, because you don't know what's coming. And all of the feedback I'm hearing is this will get a lot worse before it gets better as the shocks ripple out. If you've got that window of time to let people know that, their jobs will be gone in 8 weeks, as much notice as you can give somebody, definitely do it. Don't hold back. Let them know today and let them start looking immediately. And ultimately, depending on the structure of the program, really the government is saying to you, the business owner, we're going to put cash into the economy, and we're going to do it through you, and you're going to make the decision where. And there's two decisions there. One is getting cash into the economy by making the payments, and the second is to preserve the economy by making sure your business survives. And just one quick thought on landlords. Do have a good conversation with landlords. Ultimately, they own the building. I did go through an experience of having a factory locked shut by a landlord. And at the same time, it took us 10 days to get that factory reopened. We kept it out of the trade press. We kept it out of the news. And we also closed the largest order in the company's history while the factory was shut. So, during that time, we ended up having a really frank discussion with the landlord, and we were disputing a rent increase. And ultimately he said, look, I want to put the rent up 20%. I would negotiate to get you out. You would pay us £500,000 in a break fee, but the owner, which is a big pension fund, they won't negotiate. And something I always feared, which was running a business through a bankruptcy, actually became our friend. And I said to the landlord, if we run it through bankruptcy, he said, we will help you every step of the way. And I ended up cutting my factory costs by 75%. I moved the factory in 12 weeks. And the landlord, or the agent for the landlord, leased that building out at 2.5 times the rent that we were paying. So it was a win-win-win all around. but it was only by having a really tough, frank discussion we were able to get there.
Deborah, if you let me, just one quick comment that I thought about when I was hearing Brian, in terms of getting the help from the government. Absolutely agree with what Brian said, to try to get as much as you can. We have one company that's actually not been affected too much by COVID. It makes detergents, it makes bleach, so it's actually in full production. But even there, we've raised some of this government-funded money. We're putting it in what we call the cloud account, so the company can't touch it, but it's going to be there in case things get tougher, just to make sure that we have a bit more buffer. It's basically extremely cheap, almost free money, guaranteed by the government. We were able to raise a little bit of it because now it's okay, but perhaps 6 months from now it's going to be a lot harder. So having access to a little bit, if you can, even if you don't think you need it today, could be helpful. Just trying. You never know how things are going to turn in the next months.
Okay, then as far as kind of the legal quagmire that can occur with loan defaults and everything else that's going on, any of you actually, do you have experience with that? Brian, could you speak to that?
Sure. Again, it's like dealing with customers, suppliers, employees. The earlier you can have a conversation with somebody, the better. If you're going to default on a loan, ultimately they're going to be looking in the first instance to recoup their capital and then to recover interest rates. And most people want to try and find a solution. And also, I find the best approach is always have a balanced critique conversation. Here's what's going well. Here's where things have been challenging or different than we expected. Here's how we tried to mitigate the impact, but we still have these impacts. And that general flow of a conversation seems to let people know that it isn't a rosy sky, but we're doing everything. And sometimes the conversations, they do just end up being tough conversations where it's I remember one contract where we were going to default. They threatened to sue us, and it got to the point where I said, look, I'm going to give you the names of the 5 top-rated default lawyers in the United Kingdom. Please call any one of them and file a suit. Because as soon as we receive that suit, I'll have cause to kill the company immediately within minutes. And I'm so tired of this, and I'm so fed up. I just want this over, and you will be doing me a favor. We ended up becoming friends, and he became a very strong supporter. But sometimes you just need to go there.
That's excellent.
Deborah, if I may, it's Human. I think the contractual matrix that any business has is a wonderful place to start. You have to really learn what are your obligations and what are your rights. If you're going into a negotiation, you can never go blind. You can never go without knowing where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are, and frankly, what the win-win could be by studying the other side's strengths and weaknesses as well. But I think in situations like today, and Brian has very elegantly pointed it out, nothing is going to go exactly along the lines of what the contract says. Know what you're supposed to do and know how big the other side's stick is. But then actually everything has a solution, which is probably going to be negotiated, and it's going to be either fabricated through one side's strength or weakness, or both sides agreement that this is the win-win and this is the best we can do in the current situation. No landlord, I think, today wants an empty site, right? No bank wants to become the equity owner of every single loan that they've ever made, right? So people are going to talk, people are going to negotiate, and people are going to find a way. So I encourage people to be educated when they go into these negotiations by having read their contracts. But feel free to figure out new realities.
Wonderful. Now we have a lot of questions from people on the call, and we are YPO, and we're here to help others. So some of the questions do center around can they work with other YPO companies, and how can they do that? Alex, would you like to speak to that? I saw your hand go up.
No, my hand didn't go up. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Maybe a stretch. Brian, can you speak to that as one of the heads of the
sure.
Deal Network?
Yeah, so I think there's probably 3 things that I would come to immediately. The first would be talk to your forum and get help, advice. They know you best. Second, get involved in your industry sector inside YPO. And if your sector falls under one of the bigger YPO umbrellas, pick up the phone to the executive committee of that bigger umbrella and say, look, I'd like to start a subgroup, or I'd like to put something together. The Deal Network is doing needs and leads. They're doing webinars like this one, which are specifically around putting people together. And to give you an example, a quinoa producer in South America was on a phone call for needs and leads, bulk seller into the US, looking to create a branded product and sell it into Europe. And it turns out that a YPO'er in Europe had a second or third family generation business doing exactly that, selling rice grains as a branded product into Europe. So just put the word out to YPO'ers and talk. And then I think this will never finish, this will never leave my memory. Don't be afraid of sharing with fellow YPO'ers. I remember being at a big global YPO event, a YPO I've known for many years and had many beers and lots of fun times with. We were watching, some evening event, and he took a sip of his beer and he said, I got to tell you, I don't know how I'm going to make payroll on Friday. And this was a Tuesday, and I looked at him and I said, how can you be here and how can you be so calm? And he was just so tired and so afraid. But just by opening up, we were able to start having a conversation. I shared with him, where I've been in the same situation, having to tell a factory, there's no payroll money on Friday, it's going to come on Monday. And just by sharing and giving him some ideas, we were able to start to find a solution. And he's still running that business today. So, don't be afraid. YPO is not about everything's great. And I think the default position now is every company in the world is in a turnaround. It's just going to be easier and harder for some, but it is not business as normal. The default position is every company is in a turnaround. What actions are being taken today?
Okay, and could you add to that, Doug?
Yeah, I think that, and there's one of the topics we were talking about was acts of kindness. I think Brian, just talked about that. If you think about everything we've talked about so far, we are all living the same nightmare that we're going through literally on a global basis. And there's a word, philanthropy, and we're making a difference, which is what the YPO 3.0, is all about, for example. The thing though that a lot of people don't realize is that the philanthropy is really about deploying capital. And a lot of people, when they think of the word philanthropy, they think about capital as just cash. We've talked a lot today about, saving cash and, being really careful about how we do everything. Well, to me, capital equals cash plus human capital. And if you all take a step back and try to do an inventory of what capital you have, you've got potentially some cash that can make a difference, and not every company is suffering. Some are actually thriving in this environment. You've got potential equity investments you can make, debt investments that you can make, but the human capital is just simply your time, your expertise, your experiences that you have, the resources at your disposal, and all of your contacts. And this can be deployed against nonprofits who are in great need right now, in your community, and also in the for-profit realm. The key right now for most communities is how do you keep money flowing in those communities? And the ultimate impact and the work that we all individually and through our organizations do is going to help both societal, individuals, and also the economic development. How do we get the economic fabric of these countries, working again in our individual communities? There's a whole big difference between charity and philanthropy. Charity, people are getting emails all the time, help, 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 give money, and that's fine, and that's needed. But philanthropy is what leaders like all of us have to do, where we take a step back, really think about what the issues are, and then be able to go out there and do something about it. Getting your family, your employees, both the current and the ones that are furloughed involved, people don't want to see their communities go up in smoke. People want to help. I was reading this morning in the UK, how they put out a call for help, hoping to get 250,000 people, and 750,000 people signed up to try to get meals to elderly and to people that are stuck at home. That's what the ultimate potential is of this pandemic, is we can see such a better world if we actually focus on. So what you want to do is focus on what the needs are today. You know, as we talked about with employees, individually call those employees that you might be furloughing. You can't believe how much a difference that's going to make. And it's not a long conversation, but it'll make a difference. Deal with your suppliers. Don't just send emails. Get your team talking to them about the specific issues. Don't just not send the rent check. Talk to the landlord about what you're going through. Bring people into it and deal with people in a very human way, not just in as worse that we can possibly do. It is counterintuitive to actually invest in things like this when we're talking about conserving money, but I believe very strongly that we could get an incredible ROI, not only for our companies, the respect we'll get from our suppliers, from our customers, from our finance sources, but for our employees to see that we're really trying to do everything. In many of our companies, we've stopped taking our management fees. The CEOs have stopped taking income. That goes an incredibly long way. So acts of kindness, individual and collective, is what's going to get us through this.
And I'm going to go through and ask each one of you that to give your experience and your thoughts on what can really help the people on the call today. Alex?
Well, in general, I mean, not just in acts of kindness, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think from all the things I've heard, I think the biggest takeaway is to take action soon, do it fast. I think, as everybody said, we got to go deep. Some of the questions that were out there where, you know, what's the version of getting the new cash versus taking people out? I think we have too much uncertainty now on how long this is going to take and the effect it's going to have. So my big advice to people on the call is be much tougher than you want to. And it's always easier to grow back and to add cost later. It's much harder to take it away once you've done it initially and you've all the amount you've lost in the process. So I think it's a time to be realistic and go deep and hard as we don't know what's coming.
And Human, your private equity fund, actually Beyond Capital, is about doing good and doing well. And you're also going to be posting the playbook. Could you speak to that?
Sure. Beyond Capital is an early stage impact investing fund, and we support businesses that improve the lives of the poor. Geographically, we invest in India and East Africa. That's my side gig. My wife is the CEO, and she's actually quite an active YPO'er. My day job is a turnaround CEO. So when Corona happened, we put a playbook together for our portfolio companies, which just talks about everything that we've just touched on as a group here. What's interesting is, I think what I would add to Alex and Doug's points earlier is the turnaround skill set is a skill set, just like every other skill set in business. So people shouldn't be shy in seeking help and finding the right expertise to get them through the next few months. Because our young startup businesses can't go hire Alex partners and all those professionals that they would probably bring in if they were much bigger business. We made them a playbook, and it's all basic common sense, and it's all stuff that people can do. But if people can get the help, especially through YPO, they should continue to do so. I'm really looking forward to sharing our playbook with you all, and happy to help any YPO in any way I possibly can.
Brian, thoughts on, a lot of people are wondering whether they should hibernate, lay up, what to do. What are your thoughts?
It's a great time to really think about your business and look at, if I had a blank sheet, where would I start? I think the points made here are great. And, Human mentioned the playbook for everybody on the call. We're going to arrange to get that playbook emailed out to you after the call. One of the headlines that always goes through my head is the diplomacy of hospitality. So I mentioned the guy who, wanted to sue us. We finally cracked that relationship when I took him to a reasonable restaurant, nice but reasonable, but brought along a good bottle of wine that I knew he would like. Again, not super expensive, but very, very sensible and thoughtful. We had an investment we were trying to close with a fund coming into one of the turnarounds. and it just got bogged down with the accountants and the lawyers. And finally, I just showed up at the fund's office one morning with fresh-made cinnamon buns from the bakery down the street. And I had enough buns so everybody in the office had a bun, and there was still some left over. And just that diplomacy of hospitality made all the difference of rebuilding a personal relationship and getting things going forward. And I can't take credit for discovering that. It's how Nixon opened up China, the diplomacy of hospitality.
Okay, we only have, let's see, about 5 minutes left on the call. We've been taking questions this whole time, and thank you all very much for putting those into the chat box. But if you want to ask a few last questions, or if any of the panelists would like to give closing comments.
Could I just, Paul Harder's got one there about critical suppliers. And in turnarounds, I think this is key because cash is so critical. One of our goals was to make every supplier non-critical. And what does that mean? It means having 2 sources for every component, or having a backup, and then using both sources all the time, whether it's a 90-10 split or a 50-50 split. On the biggest order in the company's history, one of the suppliers, a critical supplier, which was sole source for us, the CEO fell in their factory and bumped his head and ended up in the hospital in a coma. And suddenly we shut down in the middle of a turnaround, huge working capital sitting in the warehouse of inventory and parts, because that one process had halted. So our goal from that point forward was to make every process non-critical, no sole source suppliers. It's hard, you don't always get there.
You also could use this as an opportunity. You know, you will have some suppliers that are critical to you. And while I totally agree, you want to make sure that you've got redundancy in that. The opportunity, if you do have the ability to pay, I was talking with one of my forum members last night that, you know, he's got incredible surge in his business, but he's got a couple suppliers that he absolutely needs, and he needs them to prioritize them, but they've got some cash crunch. So he's using some of his capital to be able to prop them up, and he's going to take equity stakes in some of these people. So, you know, there's another opportunity there as part of your survival plan. You know, you might be able to actually turn this into a positive.
And Doug, just follow up quickly on that. You're absolutely right. This is a great time, a time of crisis and challenge is a great time to build lasting friendships. And I know of a large customer here in the UK. They rang up their cleaning company because everyone's working from home. They rang up their cleaning company and said, we're going to continue to pay you under the normal terms of our contract, the full amount. When their employees started getting sick with COVID, that cleaning company prioritized cleaning their offices and doing a deep clean ahead of everybody else, because a few weeks ago, this customer or this bank was proactive and said, we're going to support our small suppliers. A great time to build powerful relationships.
Would anyone else like to give some tips or closing comments? Okay. There are.
Deborah, I'd only just echo that. Look, everything is an opportunity. The unfortunate side of the opportunity is that it probably comes off the back of some retrenchment. But as long as we keep on our eyes on the new opportunities to reinvent, to be more efficient, to be more connected, to be more kind, to be more impactful, and to be the true servant leaders that I think the YPO leadership, membership wants to be, this is an opportunity for all of us.
And I just want to say that over the last couple of weeks and for the next few weeks or so, there are going to be a lot of YPO Deal Network Needs and Leads rapid fire that Brian is hosting. And so for all of you with your companies, we are all in this together, and everybody has, you know, a lot of experience in things that have worked, haven't worked. And we're all here for each other with the, you know, needs and leads. So you can talk about, do you need help with a payroll issue with employees? So please come back to the Deal Network and see see what you can join in for some more tips. And thank you so much to the panel. You've done an incredible job, and it's been my honor to moderate you.
Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sure all of us as other YPO'ers are always happy to be available to everybody. So
Yeah,
don't be shy, reach out and get help.
absolutely. Reach
Yes.
out to you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.